The escalation between Iran and Israel has reached an unprecedented level today, much higher than in 2024. This is not a surprise for our subscribers. We had anticipated this rise in tensions, a direct extension of the wars in Gaza and Lebanon. The issue of Iran's nuclear program is part of a context of rapidly shifting regional balances. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's Syrian regime, combined with the decline of Iranian influence, is reshaping the map of the Middle East, and therefore the priorities for the powers involved, including Iran and Israel. In response to these changes, the United States is relying, as we have seen, on the creation of a strategic axis bringing together Turkey, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. The goal of this triumvirate is to maintain relative regional stability and to contain Iranian expansion. This strategy is part of the tradition of American thalassocracy, that is, the control of major maritime routes worldwide through regional allies in order to limit the influence of major continental powers. However, this arrangement remains fragile and contested. I invite you to watch the videos on the topic. In this game of alliances, Saudi Arabia occupies a central place. Often presented as an island of stability, the kingdom actually hides a much more complex history, marked by deep tensions and vulnerabilities that are every bit as deep as those of its neighbors. Since the 1950s, the kingdom has been shaken by central and social movements, coup attempts, and internal purges, revealing persistent fractures. These long-contained cracks could one day disrupt the country's balance, call into question the regime's longevity, and have consequences for this already explosive region. The contemporary history of Saudi Arabia is far from one of unshakable stability. From its founding at the beginning of the 20th century, the unification of the kingdom was achieved through confrontation. Tribal wars, internal rivalries, and foreign interventions have marked the consolidation of power. The British gave way to the United States starting in 1945, sealing a strategic partnership centered on oil. Thanks to its geographical position at the crossroads of the Middle East, near the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi Arabia quickly became an essential geopolitical player. But above all, it is the oil windfall that ensures the political survival of the royal family, protected by the major English-speaking powers. In the 1950s, the kingdom went through significant social and political turmoil. Arab nationalism took hold in the region, amplified by the Cold War. The eastern province, rich in oil and predominantly Shia, then became the center of protest. The Aramco workers, a company then under American control, began organizing as early as 1952 to demand better working conditions. The end of racial discrimination, salary increases, and the recognition of Arabic as a language of instruction. These demands quickly became political. In 1952, the coup by the free officers in Egypt overthrew King Farouk. This upheaval would inspire the entire region. In 1956, a general strike marked a decisive turning point. The demands expanded to include the adoption of a constitution, the legalization of political parties, and the limitation of Aramco's influence. The government's response is immediate and severe, with mass arrests, torture, and heavy prison sentences. This repression highlights the fragility of the Saudi social contract and the regime's dependence on a powerful security apparatus. The late 1950s were marked by growing tensions at the highest levels of the state. The rivalry between King Saud and Crown Prince Faisal led to the exile of the Free Princes, members of the royal family who supported a constitutional monarchy. Their return, after Faisal ascended to the throne in 1964, was not enough to ease internal tensions, which still persist within the ruling elite, and whose intrigues would deserve much more than just a video. At the regional level, the divide between progressive republics and traditional monarchies is growing deeper. Arab nationalism, embodied by Gamal Abdel Nasser, became more radical in response to the Gulf monarchies. Several coups d'état marked this period. In 1958, the Iraqi monarchy was overthrown.
La monarchie irakienne est renversée.
In 1962, the king of North Yemen was deposed with the support of Egypt. In 1969, King Idris I of Libya was overthrown by Colonel Gaddafi. And Saudi Arabia was not spared. In 1969, Air Force officers tried to overthrow the Saudi dynasty, but the operation failed. The people responsible were arrested and executed, leaving a lasting trauma within the royal family. Since that event, the Saudi authorities have exercised very strict control over the army to prevent any further coup attempts. This mistrust has resulted in the relative marginalization of military officers and chronic incompetence within its army. Meanwhile, the Saudi Royal Guard, considered more loyal and reliable, has been favored by the authorities. Starting in the 1990s, the opposition evolved. Arab nationalism gave way to radical Islamism, which became the main threat to the regime. In Saudi Arabia, the Sawa movement, influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood, initially opposed the presence of American troops on Saudi soil during the First Gulf War. The repression of this movement by King Fahd led to radicalization. It was marked by a wave of attacks against Western interests. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, the Saudi branch of al-Qaeda launched a terrorist campaign, which was eventually crushed by a crackdown led by Prince Mohammed bin Nayef. The 2010s marked a new phase of widespread political repression. The purges within the royal family, the arrest of liberal or religious activists, and the assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul in 2018, which illustrates the regime's determination to stifle any form of opposition without distinction. Because that's what you need to remember. Whether it's political, religious, or from the media, any form of opposition is repressed. A simple across-the-board strategy based on the conviction that the Saudi monarchy can survive only by eliminating all dissent, a strategy that continues to shape political life to this day. Since the spring of 2025, an unprecedented movement has emerged, the Free Masked Men, FMM. The visit of American President Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia, marked by the signing of over $600 billion in contracts, may have been one of the triggering factors, perceived by some Saudis as a symbol of corruption and exploitation. The FMM mainly operates anonymously through online messages, nighttime graffiti, and masked videos with altered voices. He criticizes the deterioration of living conditions, the proliferation of concerts and nightclubs funded by the state, and what is considered the opaque management of national resources. The demands relayed by the FMM accuse Mohammed bin Salman of poor governance, corruption, violating the dignity of citizens, and repression under the guise of reform. The movement claims to be apolitical, non-religious, and presents itself as the voice of the oppressed in Saudi Arabia. To this day, however, there is no official manifesto or clearly identified spokesperson, and the exact attribution of these demands relies on anonymous messages and online intermediaries. The increasing number of graffiti and anonymous messages attributed to the FFM still seems to indicate a local foothold, but this remains to be confirmed by investigations. Independent investigations, while official media regularly accuse protest movements of being manipulated by foreign powers, such as Qatar or the Muslim Brotherhood. Obviously, the Saudi government regularly resorts to media censorship, control of digital platforms, and restriction of freedom of expression to contain any form of dissent. Since 2017, under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, these measures have intensified. Notably, following the introduction of new taxes and economic policies that weigh on the population. Public debt exceeds $300 billion. Projects like NEOM are often seen as the symbol of an opaque power unable to meet real needs. The unemployment rate among young people under 24 is about 3 to 4 times higher than the national average. And the cost of living, which continues to rise, fuels a sense of injustice. Meanwhile, repression also encourages the emergence of anonymous initiatives. Regarding the repression of the FFM, documentation is still limited. The movement is recent and operates mainly anonymously. It is therefore difficult to verify the exact scale of this movement and therefore the exact scale of the repression directed against it, even though it is likely, by analogy with previous waves of protest, that the authorities are using the same methods as before: arrests, surveillance, and accusations of foreign interference. But what makes this movement interesting from a social point of view is that for the first time since the founding of the kingdom in 1932, large segments of Saudi society are openly expressing their disagreement with the choices of those in power. The digital uprising led by the FFM could reflect an emerging collective consciousness, which is calling for a complete and, for now, peaceful change. The virality of messages on social media illustrates the extent of the discontent, even as repression intensifies and social crises multiply. Because MBS has alienated various segments of the population, we've already discussed this many times in videos. From marginalized Bedouins relegated to precarious neighborhoods to businessmen weakened by economic restructuring. For example, Jeddah, once the economic capital, has lost its status, fueling local resentment. Moreover, the marginalization of certain influential princes who are now required to request permission to travel abroad also reveals the government's fear of a possible internal coalition. Of course, it is still too early to accurately measure the strength of this movement and its social base. The messages shared on social media and the diversity of supporters suggest a wide reach, but caution is still necessary. The free masked men now embody a form of silent and unprecedented protest in Saudi Arabia. While this is not the first expression of dissent in the kingdom, as we have seen, this movement stands out because of its characteristics and its emergence in a country of more than 30 million people. The risks faced by its supporters are considerable: imprisonment, closed-door trials, and even execution. The public space, especially the digital one, remains tightly controlled, particularly on social media, as shown by the recent convictions of activists for simple online posts. What started out as individual and anonymous actions could well reveal a more widespread anger, shared and potentially unifying. Authorities still haven't issued an official statement about the movement. State media and some religious or Wahhabi figures have publicly condemned it, linking it to outside influences. The atmosphere remains marked by increased vigilance from security services and ongoing repression of any form of dissent, in line with methods already observed during previous waves of protest. The fact that this movement was born inside the country and not in the exiled diaspora is a notable element. It opens up the possibility of locally rooted protest, potentially capable of mobilizing public opinion. However, the outcome remains uncertain. As history has already shown us, the response to protest often favors repression over openness or reform. The emergence of the Free Masked Men movement could mark a major turning point in the political history of Saudi Arabia. For the first time, the protest does not come from outside or from traditional groups, but from a connected, educated Saudi youth determined to break the cycle of repression. This dynamic is reminiscent of the early days of the Arab Spring, but it faces a tightly controlled national context, where repression remains systematic and the lack of checks and balances limits any prospect of rapid change. 3 scenarios are now emerging. The first scenario is an authoritarian crackdown that could force opponents into exile and radicalize the protest movement, without necessarily shaking the foundations of power. The second scenario is a partial opening under international or internal pressure, which remains unlikely, as Mohammed bin Salman still controls the security apparatus and Saudi Arabia remains a pillar of American geopolitics. Finally, the most realistic scenario is that of persistent but contained dissent in the face of a regime that, for now, manages to neutralize its opponents and maintain its grip on society. What is at stake in Saudi Arabia goes beyond the figure of the prince or the regime, because it is the future of an entire society that is at stake, between modernity, tradition, and social justice. It remains to be seen whether this new generation of Saudis will be able to turn anger and frustration into a true collective project, capable of redefining the future of the kingdom, or if it will end up in oblivion like its predecessors. I hope this video has given you some keys to understanding the fragility of Saudi power and the dynamics of opposition to the House of Saud. As always, the goal is not to predict an imminent collapse of Saudi Arabia, but to provide a more nuanced perspective on a country that is often reduced to cliches. If you're interested in the topic, I also recommend our 2 videos on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the Saudi perspective, as well as on the balancing policy that Mohammed bin Salman is trying to pursue internationally, with partial but notable success on certain issues. And above all, thank you. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, comment, and share. It really helps the channel grow. I welcome your feedback, especially if you have experience or expertise on Saudi Arabia. Share it in the comments. This was Quentin for Terabelo. Thanks for your loyalty and see you next time.